Hello and welcome to the Intentional Wealth Update from Morton Brown Family Wealth. I'm Dennis Morton.
Hi, and I'm Katie Brown.
So we're joining you guys a little bit early this week. We wanted to do a quick video to talk a little bit about what's happening in the financial sector, the fallout from Silicon Valley Bank, which failed last week, one of the largest bank failures in 15 years. And we want to talk a little bit about the risks that are involved, the circumstances around the bank failing, and what that means for us as investors. So to start out, there's been, and by the time you see this, there'll be a lot of information published about the circumstances and everything else. But essentially, this particular bank, which had a concentration in tech wealth in California, got into a pinch where it couldn't run its business when it had long-term debt obligations on its books that had declined in value. It had kind of a narrow depositor base, and the business imploded. It was no longer sustainable. The circumstances of that, there's a lot that's going to be written. But I think what we're taking out of this is that the safety of your bank is a question for people who are very conservative investors, for people who say, I want to have my money in cash, especially a lot of money in cash. The FDIC insurance levels might not be something you've thought about in quite a long time. And that's no different from last year, which another risk to cash was inflation, which we hadn't had to think about in a really long time. So I find it interesting, Katie, that cash becomes very desirable and advantageous in a year like last year when everything was going down. But it's not riskless, is it?
No. And I think that's something to acknowledge. I mean, even deciding to keep money in cash versus investing or in any other asset class, regardless of where you put your money, it's an active decision. And every decision that you make has opportunities, but also risk. And we don't always think of cash as carrying a lot of risk. But even like you said, in a year like last year, yes, it was not subject to investment volatility the same way that the markets were, but with inflation, it presented its own type of risk. And that's not to say you shouldn't hold cash. Cash serves a very important role in an individual's balance sheet, a family balance sheet, helping to support the household and the family. There's a lot of positive uses for cash, but like any asset class, anything out there, once you go deep and become more concentrated and you're not as diversified across many different things, you're fostering an environment for risk to pop up.
Yeah, we hear people say sometimes when they talk about the comfort of having cash in the bank, that you can almost imagine the thought process is, I'm going to put it in the bank and then there I could forget about it. I don't have to be doing anything and just ignore it. We call these intentional wealth updates. We're big fans of being intentional with your decisions. And just pushing something off to the side saying, there, good, I don't need to think about it. Well, have you thought about your FDIC insurance coverage? Have you thought about the impact of inflation? It's not that you can remove the responsibility of the decisions, the responsibility of that choice, just by putting it in cash and walking away. So that I think it's a big part of what we can do as advisors is educating people to just understand, what am I gaining in security? What am I losing in potential risk? And have I thought through all of those things? This whole circumstance, we talked to a lot of people in the last couple of days, just checking in with clients and see how they're doing. And I had someone say to me, I was paying attention to the news for a little bit. I kind of got away from it last week, and I had no idea that this was even brewing. And then all of a sudden, this bank was gone.
Yeah.
And did I miss something? And it got me thinking about how risk shows up. And for the last several years, every election cycle, we hear people say, hey, I think on the first Tuesday in November, X is going to happen. My guy or gal is going to win, or this guy or gal is going to lose, and everything's going to change. And we talk a lot about there's no set date for when risk emerges. If there's a date on the calendar, the market's adjusting to it as you get closer and closer. Real risk is exactly that. Where did that come from? And you look back through history, look at the most volatile moments, the 87 crash, September 11th, the global pandemic. Nobody had those on their bingo cards at the beginning of the year. And yet there they were, and it just pops up. So it's just, risk is never on the calendar. It's the thing you weren't even expecting, and there it is.
And that's why you plan. And
Yeah.
it's so important. We have these conversations with our clients often. Let's make sure we have the right resources in the right buckets, because we never know what's going to happen. So whether it's a matter of making sure you have appropriate emergency reserves. And that is always a number one, have what you need. But beyond what you need, then you want to make sure the rest of that money is put to work to be productive for you in some form or fashion, and that you're not unintentionally creating additional risk. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing with the bank failure. There were significant amount of money above and beyond the FDIC insurance coverage. So as you said, even just that awareness of where are my coverages, what could potentially pop up. We don't advocate for a super reactive environment. We really advocate for the proactive environment to think through scenarios and make sure that we're building in enough of a cushion to weather all types of market environments, because we don't know what's going to happen when.
Right, right. By the time the risk shows up, you can't plan for it. I mean, for the unfortunate people who were depositors in this bank, one week circumstances are one thing, and the next week there's just no time to even respond or react. And unfortunately, that's how it shows up. Another thing we kind of toyed around with is this idea of the existential crisis for a bank is the traditional run on a bank, which is what this was. Everyone tried to get all their money out at the same time. None of us are banks. We're running personal balance sheets, and we have our households with different assets. And we talk about diversification and liquidity being so important. What would constitute a run on your financial plan, like that existential, here comes everything all at once, and what do we do? What are some things that would be that kind of a risk?
Something extreme. It'd have to be extreme that you, once again, did not see coming. And you might have played through some different scenarios, but you get blindsided in life. We all get blindsided at times. So whether it's a major health event, a sustained loss of employment, things along those lines. But it's things that happen to you and your family, like directly. I think the cautionary tale is to not see something that's happening over there and say, all right, I need to change everything in my world here, because that may not actually impact you. So to be able to step back and say, it's a crisis. Is it my crisis? How does it impact me? I think that's a really healthy, thoughtful exercise to do, because once again, it's better to be proactive than reactive. And so to be able to think through the process and say, okay, maybe I need to make a change, maybe I don't. But running in on your financial plan, pump the brakes before you move too fast there.
Yeah, and you're right. It's that thing that happens uniquely to you. I mean, sometimes we talk to people about the risk in the stock market, as if the stock market was a thing, but it's a reflection of how many industries, how many companies over how many countries, right?
Mhm.
And if one of those companies fails, that's a catastrophe for the people who work there, for shareholders who are concentrated in there. But if you're diversified, if you've spread your risk out, the odds of all those things happening at the same time are next to zero. But the thing that's happening to you, if you're, like you said, if it's a health event, if it's a job, or even if you're concentrated in a particular lifestyle, and suddenly that lifestyle no longer works. And I think it's an important thing to remember as we think about risk and safety and just the barbells and the trade-offs that happen. I really like that line, Katie, about risk. Risk is a choice. Every choice has a risk and an opportunity. And I think these are good reminders. The last couple of years have been a lot of reminders that things can go, just as they can go up sometimes, they can go down for a lot of reasons and catch us a little bit off guard.
Yeah, definitely a reminder. But I'd also encourage people to recognize through all of these challenges, there's always a silver lining. So whether it's stricter requirements or oversight, or a little more scrutiny on the balance sheets for these custodians of cash. And I think that we are probably at a point where we need to update some of the regulations. And these are the types of events that stimulate some hopefully good actions going forward to continue to help protect consumers.
Right. You're right. We go these long periods of time of pretending like things are set the way they should be, and then you wake up one day and realize how antiquated certain things are, and they just need our attention again. And every generation goes through their learning moments. And I think for this generation, seeing inflation for the first time, there's risks in the financial system always. It's a good reminder. So, Katie, we've been talking about risk all day. You and I both had experiences over the weekend where we both chose to be risk averse in very, high wire situations. Where did you choose to be risk averse this weekend?
Sure. So I was skiing with my family up in Vermont. We were at Okemo. So it's my two kids, my husband and I. We went down a Glade run, which started out great. I was hanging in there with everybody. And full disclosure, I'm the worst skier in my family now, but I was hanging in there, keeping along till we got toward the end. And I swear those trees got closer, the slope got steeper, and my little trick of trying to walk down sideways would not work. So I actually took my skis off and slid down on my butt for the last part of it, as my son shook his head and told me I should be embarrassed.
That's
You know what
awesome.
though? I got down in one piece. I managed my risk and I got down in one piece and I walked into the office today.
That's right. And similar, I took my daughter out skiing in Pennsylvania for probably the last time this year, and she wanted to go over a couple of jumps, and I followed her down, and then the jumps were about that high. And the second time, I said, "We're not doing this anymore." Dad also wants to walk in one piece. So here you have your intact Morton Brown Family Wealth team. We're solidly here, and we're managing risk on all fronts. So, but if you do have questions about what's happening in the markets, or specifically just about that, about risk and safety and those things, those are conversations that we'd love to have, and happy to answer anything that you have.
Take care.